It's Friday, June 19th. Happy Juneteenth to listeners in the US. I'm Brian Walsh, and welcome to This Week in Impact, where I talk with ImpactAlpha journalists and editors about some of the most interesting impact investing stories we've been covering. This week, I'm joined by editor Amy Cortese. We'll discuss Asset Light is out, Hard Assets, Local Operation, or Halo is in, as private equity titans at the SuperReturns Berlin conference focus on AI, energy, and defense. Plus, how to design broad based ownership of AI to share power along with wealth. And finally, this week's Deal Spotlight shines on Fund of Funds Realized Capital Partners, which, with backing from the Canadian government, launched its debut vehicle at $277 million to back impact fund managers across Canada. That's all coming up on This Week in Impact. Hi, Amy. Welcome back to the podcast.
Hi, Brian. Great to be here as always.
Now, as a New Yorker, how are you feeling about the Knicks win this week?
Oh, we are so excited. Yeah, the city has been electric.
That's amazing. All right. Well, first up this week, Amy, you were at the SuperReturn conference in Berlin, one of the biggest annual gatherings of private equity fund managers and limited partners in the world. You reported on a massive focus shift from asset light businesses like software as a service to so called Halo investments. That stands for hard assets, local operation. Things like AI build out, energy infrastructure, and defense tech. What was the overall vibe like, and what surprised you most about what investors were and weren't worried about at the conference?
Brian, it was wild. It was a sea of blue suits. I had never been to Super Return in Berlin, had heard about it for years. So it was really fun to go. It was hopping, a lot of after parties, side events, typical PE. They monetize all the free space, lobby lounges. They had little tiny homes set up, and all the storefronts along the avenue that the conference was on were also rented out to private equity firms and other people.
So, Super Return drew 5,000 attendees. What surprised you most about what investors were and weren't worried about?
Oh, yeah. Well, the buzz was about SpaceX and the coming Anthropic and OpenAI IPOs and, all the wealth about to be created. I mean, this is a mainstream conference, but, it was interesting. Right before the conference, Anthropic had warned that at the rate that AI is advancing, humans could soon lose control over AI systems. And the company suggested that humans may want the option of a temporary global pause in case things get out of control with these frontier models. And to give people time to prepare. So you would think people might be talking about that, but it was more or less met with a shrug. At Super Return, it was really all about the opportunity and the build out and the coming transformation. I mean, there was some, fear, of course, about what it's already doing to portfolios and the further damage it could do as AI kind of eats, categories of software. And there were some people that voiced concerns, but it kind of gets to that shift to physical assets that you talked about, right? There were a lot of people, shifting into chips and robotics and energy and the physical side of things. And I guess I would say I was maybe not surprised, but a little dismayed to see that renewable energy was kind of downplayed there at the main conference. I did attend a side conference that was just focused on the energy transition, and even that drew fewer LPs than in previous years. And, it's all about security, energy security is kind of overshadowing climate concerns. So, not a surprise, really, but I guess that's the new geopolitical reality that we're in.
Right. I was very struck by that, the framing around climate has been overtaken by the framing around energy security and this need for, all of the above energy supply. Yes, renewables could be a piece of that, but really looking at energy security to build the AI transition and this kind of new world order that we're entering.
All of the above, Brian.
Now, as this was a European conference, the focus was on European sovereignty in some ways. So, tell us more about how that played out, especially on the defense investing side.
Yeah. European sovereignty in terms of tech sovereignty and energy sovereignty, that's been a growing issue for a while, and we've written about that before. They had a whole side conference focused on tech sovereignty, and that encompasses AI. Europe feels like they want to control their own frontier models and not be, held hostage to those of the two AI superpowers. And you mentioned defense, like that's been happening for a while too. You had a lot of European investors, responsible investors, always drew a line at weapons, right? Like you could maybe do dual use technology, things like radar and drones that can, both serve the military and civilian purposes. But I noticed at this conference that all restraint is sort of gone, and they're even now positioning defense as, it's going to unleash all of this innovation in Europe and, even accelerate the energy transition. So that was interesting to see.
And you pointed out in your piece though that this kind of recurring undercurrent though is that whether or not Europe's new generation of defense and deep tech companies will stay in Europe or will they migrate to the US as they need growth capital that maybe they can't find in the European market.
Yeah, that's another common theme at European conferences when you talk to European GPs and LPs. That's happened in tech, it's happened in defense, and there's really this concerted effort from the government, down to, funds and investors to seed, scale, and keep innovative tech and defense companies in Europe. And for all the reasons that we said in this geopolitical situation, right? They don't want to be reliant on anyone else for security, for energy, or, for their AI models.
Now, turning back real quickly to energy, you mentioned in your piece Jeff Curry, the advisor to the private equity giant Carlyle. He's the one that had coined that phrase "halo." Also coined a phrase "new jewel order." What's his thesis with the new jewel order and how it relates to the energy transition?
Yeah, I really enjoyed his talk. He had written a very widely read essay, as you mentioned, The Unusual Order. And basically, he's arguing that the energy transition has really become about security, not reducing carbon emissions. And he makes the case that a joule or a unit of electric energy can be sourced from anything: gas, sun, wind, uranium, whereas fossil fuels, right, as we're seeing right now in the Gulf, have to be shipped and often through choke points. So they are not resilient and they do have that failure point. So he says electrification is the purchase of optionality.
I love that. And, that's moving towards a world where energy essentially goes to zero marginal costs.
Yes, it's almost like renewable energy is the new software, right? Why did everyone pile into software? Because you invest to create the software once, and then after that, your marginal cost goes to zero. It's kind of the same thing with renewable energy. Well, CapEx is higher, but once you have it built, the sun keeps shining, the wind keeps blowing, you're storing it with, battery energy storage. And he's making the case like this is the no-brainer, resilient, clean energy. So, I do think that point was being made there. It may not be about climate emissions anymore, but people are making this economic and this resilience case for renewable energy.
All right. Well, you can read Amy's piece that she co wrote with our colleague Danielle Rossing on the SuperReturns Berlin conference on impactalpha.com. There's also a link in our show notes. Later in the show, we'll discuss how the Canadian government catalyzed a fund of funds to back impact fund managers across Canada. But for now, we'll take a quick break. When we come back, how to design broad-based ownership of AI to share power along with wealth. Next up, how should we think about the implications of AI on power and wealth in our economy and society? Policy responses to AI have been a hot topic lately. Amid many different policy proposals, we had a guest post this week from Delilah Rothenberg of the nonprofit Pre-Distribution Initiative, which works with investors to build broad-based prosperity and reduce economic inequality. Amy, to start us off, provide some context for the policy proposals we're seeing in response to AI.
Yeah, Brian, we're not prepared as a society or a nation for the coming jobs apocalypse that some people are talking about. So there's a concern that AI could wipe out jobs or, just erode worker power. There's a scenario where you can have, GDP growth, but, higher unemployment. So what are we doing about that? Suddenly everybody's scrambling. So you're seeing proposals from here in New York. Alex Boris is running for Congress, and he's proposing an AI dividend, which would be funded by AI usage, and it would be kind of an insurance policy to pay workers in the event of mass displacement. And today, Bernie Sanders introduced a bill that would give the government a 50% stake in the largest AI companies and create a sovereign wealth fund that would pay out to Americans. And it might sound crazy, but like these are the kinds of ideas that are being floated, and even within the Trump administration, because I think, people are seeing that. There is a lot of disruption coming, and we need to start thinking about how we're going to deal with that.
Now, some of these proposals that you cited are dealing with redistribution of wealth that's already been generated, but Delilah is from the Pre-Distribution Initiative. So tell us about her approach to this issue.
Yeah, yeah. And I love that distinction, right? So, like in general, the pre-distribution initiative is saying, like, rather than after the fact, address societal issues with charity and government spending or taxes. Let's address the upstream issues and the structures in finance and society that are creating these imbalances. So PDI, as they call themselves, just came out with a three-part series on the risks from AI to the labor market and society and how to address them. And so in those papers, they look at some of the main proposals being bandied about. So, universal basic income, sovereign wealth funds. And as Delilah writes, like these all have merit and they may work. However, she's arguing for more equity and ownership for workers and communities, right, who are hosting like the big data centers and all the infrastructure. So her critique is that some of these other things are top down. They're doing nothing about the concentration of power in the hands of some of these AI companies and their investors. And that, some of these things like universal basic income and sovereign wealth fund payments, I mean, basically, in a scenario where people's jobs are precarious or they've been displaced, you're leaving people dependent on these like little modest trickle down payments. So she's arguing for, more ownership, more governance, and people actually having a say in some of what's happening.
So how do some of her proposed solutions play out? What would that look like in practice?
Yeah, and I think this is the initial paper from them where they're floating some of these ideas, and they announced an AI innovation lab to, sort of take this conversation forward with other stakeholders. But in the paper and in her guest post for us, she explains a proposal that would share wealth using the example of rideshare drivers, right? Like as Waymo and Uber and Tesla and everyone are rolling out these autonomous vehicles, and robo taxis. One of the first groups to be affected are all of the rideshare drivers, whether they're employees or they're in the gig economy. So PDI has designed what they're calling the driver equity transition stakes as a model that could then be adapted for other scenarios. But basically, how it works is that so a Waymo, an Uber, a Tesla, they need to get an operating permit from a municipality to or a city, to operate there. So in exchange for the operating permits, companies such as Waymo, Uber, and Tesla would create these trusts that would be funded with a share of their gross revenue from the, robo-taxi fares. And they would place that into this trust that would be governed by drivers. So there you have her governance, right? And you have elements of some of the other models. And that trust would then compensate drivers via income support, equity participation in the autonomous vehicle company, and by setting up what she calls diversified investment accounts, like basically a retirement account, not dissimilar to like a 401k. So those are the three pillars. And she envisions that, these could be adapted for various contexts, including for, you know, not just displaced workers, but for employed drivers as well.
So that driver equity transition stakes, or DEETS, is an interesting case study of her proposed solution here. But what's her broader call to action for impact investors in the impact investing community here?
Yeah, so she's urging the impact investing community to really pay attention to some of these issues. These are large, in some cases, publicly traded companies or about to be publicly traded, and impact investors aren't always, active in that space. But these issues are of such societal importance that I think she's, suggesting that more impact investors should be involved, and that is the idea behind the new lab that she's introducing as well.
All right. Well, you can read Delilah Rothenberg's guest piece on designing broad based wealth and power sharing tools for AI, along with her new AI lab, on impactalpha.com. There's also a link in the show notes. For now, we're going to take one more quick break. When we come back, our deal spotlight looks at how Canada seeded its social finance market and just watch private investors more than match it. The blueprint for crowding in domestic capital may already be written. Finally, this week, 3 years ago, the Canadian government set aside $755 million to jumpstart a domestic social finance market, betting that public anchor capital could unlock private dollars that wouldn't show up on their own. This week, Realize Capital Partners closed its debut fund of funds at $277 million, with private LPs contributing more than the government's anchor investment. Amy, what caught your eye about this deal?
Yeah, Brian, we had covered the launch of this social finance fund from the Canadian government last year when they made investments into their three, as they call them, wholesalers, right? So Realize Capital Partner was one, and there were two other funds that Canada will funnel capital through, and then those intermediary funds or wholesalers will in turn then invest that into Canada's social enterprises. So we wrote about that and the model. It's kind of the same model that was pioneered in the UK by Better Society Capital. But the deal that our colleague Rudy Sinatus wrote about this week was Realize Capital taking that stake from the government and using it to mobilize more investment capital.
Yeah, I was surprised to see that over 2/3 of the 23 plus or so limited partners in the deal were first time impact investors. So that's kind of helping tell the story that we're building the market here with this kind of investment.
Yeah, Brian, that was interesting, right? And I think that's exactly what the Social Finance Fund was intended to do: is crowd more mainstream investors into Canada's social economy. So among the backers were like big companies like the Royal Bank of Canada, but also Concordia University, the Canadian Medical Association, some family foundations. So it was very much a diverse mix. And realize raised 141, little over 141 million in fresh capital to match or more than match the 135 million anchor investment from the Canadian government.
So that's interesting. So how has the fund already been deployed so far?
Yeah, it's a realized as a fund of funds, and it's already deployed 111 million into 23 funds, including Raven Indigenous Capital Partners, which invests in early stage Indigenous led startups in Canada, Thrive Impact Fund, which is more of a place based fund that invests in social enterprises in British Columbia. And another one was Regenerative Capital Group, another BC based fund, and they train local entrepreneurs and that are looking to acquire small and mid-sized businesses and then finance them. So that's more of like a business ownership play. So you can see the cycle here from government to these intermediaries into some really great local funds.
Yeah, so what I really like about this deal is it's a illustration of two things. So it's that idea of having a catalytic capital anchor. So the government here is that anchor that crowded in private LPs who otherwise wouldn't have shown up. And it also connects to a broader trend we've been covering around the fund of funds as almost infrastructure for managers who can't typically access institutional capital. And so these fund of funds kind of serve as that bridge from the institutional capital providers who can't write smaller checks and the smaller funds and enterprises that need smaller checks to fund their operations. So this kind of fund of fund models helps bridge that gap.
Yeah, it's very much market building.
All right, to go deeper on this deal, there's a link in our show notes to the Realize Capital Partners profile on ImpactAlpha Edge, our data intelligence platform that contains the most comprehensive database of impact investors in the world. You'll find thousands of LP and GP live profiles detailing allocations, funds, asset classes, geographies, investment focus, and key decision makers. But that's going to do it for this episode of This Week in Impact. Thank you for joining me today, Amy.
Thank you, Brian. It was fun to be here.
And thank you all for listening. This Week in Impact is a production of ImpactAlpha and part of the ImpactAlpha podcast network. Smart conversations by and for impact investing professionals. For exclusive stories and insights about the world of impact investing and sustainable finance, join thousands of other agents of impact by subscribing. Just go to impactalpha.com/subscribe for full access. Thanks, as always, to our producer extraordinaire, Isaac Silk. For Amy Cortese, I'm Brian Walsh, Managing Director of the impact advisory firm Human Nature. We'll see you next week for more Impact.